Hi, it's Plastic EP here, welcoming you to a great episode today. We have a special guest, and I mean a special guest, Mitch Axelrod, the man who wrote the Bible about Beatle cartoons, the book Beatle Tunes. Welcome, Mitch.
Welcome, Plastic EP. How you doing?
Thank you. And you're in Boston, yeah?
No, New York.
Oh, sorry. Apologize.
How you doing?
That's even better. Oh, sorry. The streets are empty there, yeah?
The streets are empty everywhere, I hope.
Well, you know what? We're here at least to fill in a bit of time and make a few people happy and fill them in on the Beatle cartoons that came out in 1965. That was King Features. So I'll just have another look at your book there, and I'll let you tell me a little bit about the research you did and how you came to write the book in 1999.
You know, it started when I was 3 years old, and I know that sounds, weird, but I was 3 in 1965 when they came out. And I loved them right away because my mom was a big Paul McCartney fan, and a Beatle fan, and they watched the Ed Sullivan Show. So, they got me into the Beatle cartoons. My mom, rest her soul, it's been a year about since she passed, but she got me into all of it. So, they were cartoons. It was great Beatle music. How could you go wrong? So I was really into it. Yeah, there you go. There's John.
There's John White.
Actually, done by McFarlane.
That's it.
And I actually consulted on those. But
did you?
Yeah, my book helped with that. We'll talk about it. But so how did I write it? Years later, I've always been a writer. I write lyrics, I write songs, and I said to myself, you know what? I'm wasting my time. There's George. I'm wasting my time just writing. I'm not wasting my time doing lyrics for songs, but I'd like to write a book. And I love the Beatles. So what would I write about? So you know what? I figured nobody's really written anything about the cartoons. Why not write a book about the cartoons? So I researched for about 4.5, 5 years. And this is before the net, before you could go and look up anything on the net. So I was going into libraries. Remember those? Libraries. And I was looking up people's names in Australia, especially, which we'll talk about. I was calling everybody. So the phone company was loving me because I was spending a lot of money. And after about 5 years, it came together. And I had enough for a book.
That's amazing because, as I said, when the book first came out, living here in Australia, well, I mean, it was really big here. I believe it was on the ABC network here in 65. Yep. And as you know, most of the cartoons were drawn here.
Well, not most of them. Sorry, I didn't mean to correct you, Plastic, but...
No, that's all right. Please correct me.
No, that's all right. A bunch of them were. I mean, there were 39 total episodes. 78 total episodes. And so there were about 6 or 7, or maybe a little more that were done in Australia, but it was a big part. A big part of the cartoons were in Australia, in our Transit Park studios in French's Forest.
Sydney, must be Sydney.
Yeah, by Bondi and.
Yeah, that's Sydney.
Yeah, so they were done there. A lot of great people helped me out with this book. Which was really great. The Australian people were so super. Unfortunately, a lot of them have passed on now. We had great relationships, but I've got great memories of my interviews and all the time we spent on the research.
Yep. Now with the book, obviously, did you ever get the chance to talk to any of the Beatles?
I tried. But they didn't want to talk. They had other things going on. It's tough to get to the Beatles to talk about anything, let alone the cartoons, which, as we know, they didn't really love. So, it was an attempt, a good attempt, but no dice.
Because the reason why, I mean, I've seen the photos on the net where you see the Beatles standing against the wall, having a wine or a drink, and they've got their caricatures behind them, and it's like they don't really care. Because the great thing was, that was like money for nothing. They had the songs, they did the drawing, and they got paid. Would that be a good estimation?
Yeah, the pictures you've seen of them against that background is from July 29th, 1965, when they first saw the cartoons. at a little screening, and they called it a party because it became a drinking party, actually. But you're right. They didn't like the cartoons, but they didn't mind cashing the checks.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
those pictures you see, that was a one-off thing. Other than that, they really weren't into the cartoons at all. But I have about 25 pictures from that event that were taken by ABC News in London.
Also,
That
they
was
went
the
to
ABC
crash shot,
studio.
Mitch. They went to crash shot on the voices or the people that actually did their voices because they said it was more Americanized. They Americanized it more. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a big point of contention with the cartoons because that's the reason they weren't shown in the UK.
Yeah,
They just felt that the voices weren't that great. So they didn't listen. Lance Percival was a British guy, and
yeah,
he did Paul and Ringo, so they didn't
yeah,
mind that. But Paul Frees, who did every cartoon in the States and in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I mean, he was just huge, even in the 50s. Matter of fact, Paul Frees is the voice of the Haunted Mansion in Disney. So he did it sort of like very American. So he did the voices of John and George, almost like Rex Harrison and Peter Lorre.
yeah.
They didn't think that was so great. So that was one of the biggest point of contention for the cartoons. That's why they really aren't out now
For
and have never
me,
been released.
the sing-alongs were great. I mean, you were a
Yeah,
kid growing up here in Australia, and that was before anything because there's the first cartoon that's based around a real band using their real names and
yeah.
using their looks. And it's at the peak because 1964 is like Beatlemania, and
Oh,
here
yeah.
you have the cartoon. So it was like something totally new and something huge for the time.
Well, the funny thing is about the sing-alongs, a couple of things. They were actually good for teachers because teachers were finding out that the kids were watching the Beatle cartoons and learning how to read. So, because the lyrics would be at the bottom. They didn't have the bouncing ball, but they still were, the lyrics were there. So kids were actually starting to learn to read by the Beatle cartoons. So teachers loved it. But also, I found it funny when I first saw the sing along for She Said, She Said, because there's a 12-year-old or 8-year-old singing, "Hey, mommy, the Beatles said, I know what it's like to be dead." So a little odd that some of the choices but you couldn't help it because, when they first started the cartoons, you were right. It was like June of 64 or July of 64 when they first started or got the contracts. So the Beatles didn't have all the music out that they have, obviously, now. So the animators, directors, they didn't have much to work with. So they could only work with, that's why a lot of the cartoons have the filler songs like Anna, and What You're Doing. I mean, those weren't hits, but they were great songs, but they weren't hits. But that's all they had. So, they worked with what they had and they used it. So that's why something like She Said, She Said became a sing-along.
I love the sing along, but they also had a kangaroo from Australia in one of the episodes, the boxing kangaroo. Do you remember that one?
It was actually it was in a sing-along opening segment. Yeah, it was that was one of because the sing-alongs had, depending on the season, because there were 3 seasons and then a repeat season. The sing-alongs had the Beatles and different kind of fun stuff where Ringo would be the quote prop man for the day because he was
Yeah,
sick or
that's right.
vacationing. So Ringo would do silly things, and at one point he did have you call him a Joey, right? The
That's
kangaroo.
right, exactly.
So they
But
did have the kangaroo there.
for that time, to get 51% of the actual market in the US, that was huge.
Unheard of. A cartoon. And as you said, you alluded to it, but it's really important because the Beatles were big in music history, in animation history as well, though, because as you said, it was the very first cartoon to feature. It was a weekly cartoon to feature, real cartoon versions of real people. So it was very important, and they got a 52 share on their first on the opening day, September 25th of '65, and you never hear of a 52 share unless it's like the ending of MASH or, the Ed Sullivan Show with 73 million people. But they kept up those ratings for a while, until things moved on. But it was a phenomenal hit for King Features and ABC.
Al Broadwick's, he then went on to do Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, I have to correct you though. It's Al Brodax.
Brodax, sorry, yeah, Brodax.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, he went on to do Yellow Submarine. You know, originally Yellow Submarine was supposed to be like the Beatle cartoons. Just like I know you're a big Monkeys fan, Plastic EP, right? So, you know, originally people thought that Head was going to be like a 190-minute monkey episode.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they thought Yellow Submarine was going to be too. And in Billboard magazine, they actually announced the Beatles were doing 4 half-hour specials, which would have been a 2-hour cartoon. That was scrapped, and obviously Heinz Edelman came in and helped Al Brodax do the Yellow Submarine. But I can't imagine Yellow Submarine being a hit if it was one big Beatle cartoon, you know. So
exactly.
It was
the animation in that stands up today. It's just totally amazing. The animation and the effects.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, the colors, especially when Apple had it redone, the colors are so vivid. You can't be taking any kind of herbal medication while you're watching that movie because you'll be tripping out. But it's definitely an interesting movie.
Well, I just want to say with the Monkeys film Head, it makes no sense. There's no plot. There's no nothing. And that's what people don't get.
Well, you know, I've never liked the movie Head. It's sort of like Magical Mystery Tour. I appreciate it for what it tried to be. And I appreciate it in spurts. You know, some parts are really amazing, like Daddy's Song is amazing. And some of that stuff. But just like Magical Mystery Tour, I like for, you know, the I Am the Walrus segment. Yeah, Head doesn't work for me for some reason. And I'm a big Monkeys freak, but Head doesn't work for me.
That's great. Now, what I want to ask you, Mitch, is I want to know the story, how they got the rights to actually do the Beatle cartoons. What the story is, how that actually came about. To me, that is fascinating.
Well, honestly, it depends on what day you catch or you caught, God rest him, Al Brodax, because he told me when we met in his house, he told me that a guy came in to King Features because he was head of animation and actually Al Brodax at the time was head of the comic strip part of King Features. And he told me a guy came in with some badly drawn pictures and he followed the guy into the bathroom after the guy was rejected as a comic strip. And he said, listen, I'd like to try to animate those. And the story goes that he said, okay. And then he went on to get the rights. But another story had come out that Al Brodax was watching the Ed Sullivan Show and saw the Beatles and said, you know what, this is going to be huge. He had the wherewithal to say that even at that time. And he decided to phone up the hotel where Brian Epstein was and the Beatles were staying and try to make a deal. So he had what they call in New York a lot of chutzpah. And he you know, whichever way it happened, he did it and he got them on. And, you know, it's really an untold story of the Beatles history. And, you know, they're not released today. They've never been released on DVD or a VHS back in the day. So a lot of kids don't even know they exist. A lot of adults don't even know they exist.
Yeah, this is why I think Apple, because Apple own the rights, they should actually put it out because they're losing money from these bootlegs. The only way you can get the cartoons is bootleg or watch YouTube.
Yeah, and you're not going to get complete stuff. I mean, a lot of the bootlegs that are out there don't really have a lot of the bumper stuff, as they call it, the in-between stuff. They'll have the cartoons and the sing-alongs, but a lot of them don't have the correct bumpers or the correct openings, because there were 3 season openings. There was they used Can't Buy Me Love and A Hard Day's Night in one, and then the second one, which they only used for like 4 or 5 episodes, was Help. That's a rare one. And then they used And Your Bird Can Sing for the 3rd season, which was an odd choice at the time because And Your Bird Can Sing was not a hit. It was just an LP track and a great song. I love it. It's one of my favorites. But very odd at the time to use a non-Beatle hit as the opening of their cartoon. But they knew kids were going to watch and adults were going to watch anyway, so it didn't matter what song they chose.
I think what you say there about adults were watching it as well because, I mean, it was something before its time. And as you were saying about the opening scenes and closing scenes, they're amazing. Like that song, and your bird can sing. It's in my head, that cartoon, all the time from watching it off there.
It's weird too, because that opening, the Beatle cartoons became a little more sophisticated, so to speak. At that time, they used the 1967 promotional shot of the Beatles, which they had mustaches. So if you ever watched the Dick Clark introduction to American Bandstand, when they showed the promo films for Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, it's in black and white, but all the kids are saying, wow, they look like my grandfather, with the mustaches. So they used those pictures in the opening of the third season, which was a little odd. But by then the kids were growing up, and the Beatles were too. And it didn't matter, but they wanted to be portrayed as a little older. Although I think it's really odd that the last song ever animated was Strawberry Fields Forever. In the cartoon, they only use it as Strawberry Fields because the animators didn't know the song title. And John has glasses, and they're singing the song from 67 or late 66 when they recorded it. Came out in 67, but they're still the Mop Top Beatles. So it's kind of weird, but it's still fun. One of my favorite cartoons.
You know what I'm saying? The cartoons and what they made, it, as I said, it stands up today, and the kids of today, they don't know what they're missing. They need to go on YouTube and actually watch the cartoons. Because to me, A Hard Day's Night, I remember as a young child at state school, when that song came out and that opening chord, it just hit you, and it was like something you've never heard. Those opening lines, it's been a hard day's night and I'm sleeping like a dog. It's just like, I'm working like a dog. It's amazing because no one sang to you like that at that time.
Well, even the opening chord, a lot of the Beatles songs that I love, like Help, A Hard Day's Night, they come at you right away, like Revolution. They punch you in the face from the minute you hear it. And Help comes in and just screams help. But A Hard Day's Night, that opening chord, the iconic chord, it was just, it's all fresh. It's never gone out of style, none of it. So the only thing about YouTube is that now copyright infringement is catching on. So a lot of the cartoons, you'll hear the voices, you'll see everything. When it comes to the songs, they blank it out because they don't want to get in trouble for copyright. But I agree with you. I think Apple needs to release them simply because it's the Beatles. It's cartoons, as I said earlier. It's cartoons with Beatle music. How could you go wrong? And, a lot of people are showing their grandkids the cartoons now, in bootleg form. I think it would be a huge revenue stream for them. But, I understand a lot of the reluctance because political correctness, I hate that. It's just a cartoon, and Popeye has come out and he's done some weird stuff like Popeye nips the nips and, and you know what? In Australia, back in the day, they had the Jim Crow laws. And, a lot of the cartoons were depicting Japanese folks. And if I've said that wrong, I'm sorry. I don't mean, but, everybody back then, Australia was in a war with Japan. Yeah. So they didn't really depict the Japanese folks as the nicest people, or they kind of stereotyped them. So I can understand that a little political incorrectness there. But listen, I've offered, you could easily do a best of the Beatle cartoons and do a 20 cartoon, 2-hour DVD of the ones that would just have nothing to do with any, politically correct stuff or incorrect stuff, and just have pure fun. And it would be I think it would be a huge seller. I really do.
Mitch, I got to ask you, is there any research that you did that didn't make the book?
Wow. You know what? There's one thing that not that I regret, because I had no choice. Yeah. In the book, I talk about the premiere party, the screening. And after that, look, there's a piece of footage shot by my buddy Norman Kaufman, who was the production assistant on the cartoons. He was 16 at the time. He shot the Beatles coming in on that day, and there's a whole bunch of footage of that. And if you look on YouTube and look up Mitch Axelrod Beatletoons, part of that footage is in a interview I did with Fox TV in New York at the time. But the one thing I regret not finding, I was told so many times about a story about John Lennon getting very kind of bored at that party and getting a bottle of wine and going under one of the buffet tables. And nobody could find him. And everybody got really nervous because one of the Beatles was missing. And his minder, bodyguard, couldn't find him either. So they went around looking, and Norman went around and lifted one of the tablecloths and found John Lennon under the table drinking. And John Lennon invited him in, said, don't give me up. Just come down and have a drink with me. So the one thing I didn't have at the time was any evidence of John going under the table. Since the book came out, you always find stuff. So I do have 2 pictures in my possession of John going under the table and then under the table.
That's
so
amazing.
I would have loved to have had that in the book, but you put out what you got, and
the best things sometimes don't make it.
What was that?
The best things sometimes don't make it. I got to ask you, in how many countries was the cartoon dubbed in? How many languages?
Oh my goodness!
In French?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because when you wrote into King Features, and you wrote about the Beatle cartoons, they sent you a postcard, a long postcard, and you've seen the picture with the alligator under Ringo's drums, which was only used in one episode, by the way. So I'm not sure why McFarlane chose to put a box set out with the alligator, but I digress. But when you wrote into King Features, you got back a promotional card saying, "Thank you for writing." And then it said something like, the Beatles want to say thank you and to watch in many different countries. So, I think they listed about 7 or 8, but it was dubbed in a whole bunch of countries. Very odd, because I was in Puerto Rico with my family in the 70s, and we were watching TV one day in black and white, and because Puerto Rico had black and white TV, and all of a sudden the Beatle cartoons came on in Spanish. And I took my huge VCR camera, which was the size of a table at that time in 1970, and I held it right in front of the TV, and I filmed 4 or 5 episodes in Spanish. It was a weird experience. It was, but it was fun. And you know what? It just showed that they could be shown in different countries. Japan loved them too. So, they were enjoyed in a lot of countries.
Mitch, I just got to say, with the book, people can go on Amazon and purchase the book Beatle Tunes.
Yes.
And also, if you can tell me about your podcast and what you've got happening on Facebook.
Yeah, they can go and purchase the book. They could always write to me if they want. And the podcast, actually, we started about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Wow. 11 years ago as the Fab Forum, F-O-U-R-U-M. We had 4 of us, and we since have made it to 3, sort of like when Peter left the Monkees. But we're 3. We're Fab 4 Free for All now. It's Fab with the number 4 free, the number 4 all. We are on Facebook. We have a website. If you go to fab4freeforall.com or f4f4a.com, you can find us. Basically, we don't do any music at all. We just talk about the Beatles. We pick a topic and we run with it from an hour to however long we want to go. We've just started doing Zoom shows because we want to get together and try to fill the void during this really weird time we're having now, uncharted waters. So it's kind of weird, but it's my buddies Tony Triguardo and Rob Leonard, who are both Beatle historians and Beatle DJs here in the States for radio stations, and myself. And we've just had a blast, and we love doing it. We're not doing it for any money. We do it as a labor of love. And we just continue to do it. And we just recorded last night, and we're having a blast. So it's always fun to talk about the Beatles.
Up to how many podcasts are you up to now? Episode what? Do you know?
We're up to 217, but we've did 200 plus as Fab Forum. So we've done, close to 500.
Mitch, all I want to say is today it's been my pleasure, and I'm sure you filled in a lot of questions and information for Beatle fans out there of the cartoons. And believe me, the cartoons are close to my heart. And I just want to say thank you today for being on the show. And I'm sure we're going to have another episode with you about your collectibles.
Yeah, I've got a bunch, but thank you, Plastic EP. I appreciate it. This was a blast.
Thank you so much again, Mitch.
All right, thank you, and you have a great day and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. See you, Mitch.
Take care.